This is DW News coming to you live from Berlin. No ceasefire for Syria. Russia blocks a 30-day truce at the UN Security Council as the bombardment of eastern Ghouta continues and the civilian death toll keeps climbing. Also on the program, as another victim of last week's Florida school shooting is laid to rest, President Trump appears to give some ground on gun control laws, but still insists that teachers be armed. And the Seychelles Swap, how the island paradise slashed its debt in exchange for protecting its marine environment. Also coming up in the next 60 minutes, life on eastern Ukraine's front line. Our reporter visits a village caught between Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed separatists. After almost 4 years of conflict, we'll ask a top international monitor about the prospects for peace. And at the Berlin Film Festival, the story of a Kenyan girl with cancer who wants to be a superhero. We'll talk with the film's director. Hello, I'm Terry Martin. Thanks for joining us. Russia is blocking a UN Security Council resolution that is trying to bring a ceasefire to eastern Ghouta on the edge of the Syrian capital, Damascus. Russia has put forward a raft of amendments, and a vote has been delayed until later today. Syrian government forces are bombarding eastern Ghouta, and the UN chief Antonio Guterres has called the situation hell on earth. Human rights monitors say government shelling has killed more than 400 people there since Sunday, including many children. It's one of the bloodiest episodes of Syria's 7-year conflict. Well, for some analysis now, let's bring in Middle East analyst Khaled Yaqub Owais. Thank you so much for being with us. Khaled, the bombing campaign in eastern Ghouta has claimed hundreds of lives this week alone. What are Syrian forces hoping to achieve with this?
It is Damascus.
It's a kind of a suburb of Damascus, eastern Ghouta. You know the area well. You've served as a correspondent yourself in Damascus. Now, the Syrian regime says there are thousands of opposition fighters in eastern Ghouta, some of them affiliated to Al-Qaeda and to Islamic State. What can you tell us about that? But the government obviously perceives them as a fundamental existential threat. Okay. This is a very complicated conflagration in Syria, the civil war. There are many different factions involved. Even within the regime, it's not really clear who's in charge sometimes. People on the ground in eastern Ghouta say that Russian planes are involved in the bombings. Do you think that's the case? I want to talk for a moment about the UN Security Council. They've been meeting on this issue. They're for a 30-day ceasefire in Syria. Russia's blocking it, saying it's unrealistic. What's standing in the way of an agreement? Khaled, thank you so much for talking with us this morning on DW News. Middle East analyst Khaled Yaqub Owais. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines this morning. Well, staying in the U.S., it has emerged that an armed officer assigned to the Florida school where 17 people were killed by a gunman last week waited outside the building during the shooting and did not confront the killer. This news comes as President Donald Trump is calling for tighter background checks and for some teachers to be armed. European leaders are meeting in Brussels today in an effort to address some big challenges, including the EU's post-Brexit finances. On the table is a possible increase in contributions to plug a budget shortfall after Britain leaves the bloc next year. Before that summit, the EU Commission will be hosting high-level talks on fighting terrorism and stemming migration through Africa's Sahel region. The EU is looking to boost support for the so-called G5 Sahel Joint Force. That's a security initiative set up by Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Chad. Those countries have been plagued by jihadist groups and criminal networks. Well, for more on this, let's bring in our Brussels correspondent, Barbara Vaisel. She's standing by for us there. Barbara, why is the EU focusing so much of its foreign policy attention on Africa's Sahel region?
And they know that they need to do something.
Well, what sort of something are we talking about here, Barbara? What sort of action is the EU proposing to take in the Sahel region?
And the two policy fields that are to be decided on.
Now, you mentioned the French, Barbara. The French, they do have, I'm told, around 4,000 troops in the Sahel region. They're taking a leading role in this effort. What about Germany?
Down there. But that is something that will have to be fought out between Berlin and Paris.
Barbara, thanks. That's DW's Barbara Basil there in Brussels. You're watching DW News. Still to come, street battles in Bilbao. Violence mars the latest round of soccer's Europa League. Let's get some business news now with Helena and a cautionary tale and what happens when the fickle worlds of social media and reality TV collide.
Yeah, I'm afraid Snapchat is not keeping up with the Kardashians. Terry shares. Well, severe weather is threatening to add to the plight of thousands of Rohingya refugees. Terry?
That's right, Helena. The United Nations is calling for urgent efforts to help more than 700,000 Rohingya children in Bangladesh and Myanmar. In a new report, the UN's Children's Agency says a generation of Rohingya children may be condemned to a perpetual life in limbo. Some sports news now, and soccer violence has marred the latest round of the Europa League. In Spain, a policeman suffered a heart attack and died after street battles between. Elsewhere in the Europa League, Dortmund have made it through to the round of 16 after a 1-1 draw with Italian side Atalanta on Thursday. Atalanta looked set to win the tie after Rafael Toloi scored in the 11th minute for the hosts. They held on to that lead for over an hour, but then Dortmund's captain Marcel Schmelzer reacted to a loose ball and netted the equalizer, his first goal of the season, giving Dortmund a 4-3 aggregate win. RB Leipzig also survived a big scare to advance to the next round of the Europa League. Leipzig went into the match against Napoli with a 3-1 lead from the first leg, but Piotr Zielinski put Napoli ahead in the first half. Now, the Olympic athletes from Russia have won their first gold medal of the Winter Games in South Korea. Figure skater Alina Sagitova claimed the team's maiden title in Pyeongchang. Welcome back. You're with DW News. I'm Terry Martin. Our top story, Russia has blocked a UN Security Council resolution ordering an immediate 30-day ceasefire across Syria. The civilian death toll continues to rise as government forces bombard the rebel-held suburbs of eastern Ghouta near Damascus. Now, the conflict in eastern Ukraine has been raging for almost 4 years. The UN says the fighting between pro-Russia separatists and the Ukrainian military has killed more than 10,000 people. The separatists control a large area close to the Russian border surrounding the cities of Luhansk and Donetsk. Though there is a peace deal in place, the Minsk agreement, there are ceasefire violations on a daily basis. In just a moment, I'll be talking to Alexander Hug, one of the top security monitors for Ukraine. But first, this report from the embattled region. That was DW's Nick Conley reporting there. Well, with me in the studio now is Alexander Hug. He's Principal Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that has the special monitoring mission in Ukraine. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. First of all, recent weeks have brought a dip in the number of ceasefire violations in eastern Ukraine. They are down considerably from when we last talked a couple of months ago. Do you see a sustainable trend there, a real de-escalation? Now, give us an idea of what it's like for your monitors who are there on the ground in eastern Ukraine in what is effectively a war zone site. Now, the Minsk agreement stipulated a ceasefire for this area in eastern Ukraine, but there are, as you say, hundreds, if not more than 1,000 violations every day. Is Minsk dead?
I don't think so.
Well, in trying to give more will, to create more motivation, German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel, he said that even if Minsk is not fully implemented, one should begin to think about easing the sanctions on Russia in order to provide them some incentive. Do you agree? Now, the conflict in eastern Ukraine is getting rather little media attention at the moment, even though people are dying there on a regular basis, and this is a conflict with huge implications on Europe's doorstep. Why so little media attention now? Briefly, if you can, there's been talk about bringing it in a UN peace mission. Do you think that would help?
I think the discussion on how to solve the conflict is helpful.
Alexander, thank you so much for talking with us this morning. Alexander Hoog, Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine.
Thank you.
Now, tensions are running high in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where yesterday marked the 75th anniversary of the Nazi regime's execution of Hans and Sophie Scholl. The siblings were members of the White Rose. That's one of the few resistance groups in the Third Reich. They and 4 other members of the group paid with their lives for standing up to the brutal regime. A reporter went to Munich, where Hans and Sophie Scholl lived and fought for freedom.
As the White Rose wrote, "If we don't have the courage to demand what is right, we will deserve to be scattered like dust on the wind."
DW's Simon Young reporting there. Now, let's check in on the Berlin Film Festival, which is entering its final weekend. The festival this year features a co-production. It's co-sponsored by DW. It's called Super Moda, and the film was filmed in Kenya and tells the story of a 9-year-old girl who is terminally ill with cancer. She spends her last days in her home village and dreams of being a superhero. And Karian Wanaina joins us now from Nairobi. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. Congratulations. It must be very exciting to have your picture premiered at the Berlin Film Festival.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we have a clip from your film that we'd like to show our viewers. Let's take a look. A pint-sized superhero with a big voice and a punch. Super Moda, the film there. We're talking with the director. How did you come up with the idea for this film? Now, the leading role in your film apparently is played by a terminally ill girl, and I understand that 500 people wanted to audition for that role. What makes the role so attractive? And just briefly, what are you planning next?
Get out there, get funding, and just make movies. We never stop.
Okay, keep on making movies. Like Karian Wanaina there, the director of Super Moda, which is premiered at the Berlin Film Festival. Thanks for talking with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Golden Bears and the Silver Bears will all be awarded this weekend. Now, Thursday night saw a world premiere screening of the Mexican movie Museo. It's inspired by the most famous heist in the country's recent history. The film is one of 19 in the running for the Golden Bear. And before we go, just a reminder of the top story we're following for you here today on DW News. Russia has blocked a UN Security Council resolution ordering an immediate 30-day ceasefire across Syria. The civilian death toll continues to rise as government forces bombard the rebel-held suburbs of eastern Ghouta near Damascus. And don't forget, you can always get DW News on the go. Just download our app from Google Play or from the Apple Store. That'll give you access to all the latest news from around the world, as well as push notifications for any breaking news. You can also use the DW app to send us any photos or videos you think we might be interested in. And just remember, you can always get all our latest stories online, too, at dw.com. Thanks for watching.